Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, episode 13 in the hashtag 2 years ago today CW series, we deal with the very difficult area of Nutgate. It's difficult because it was an emotional day for a lot of people. It's difficult because the emotional residue, the emotional stain of that day actually carried over from July 9th all the way until the murders. It was something that sort of clouded the events to some extent. I think even on the weekend that Shanann was away, I think she was still wondering whether Chris Watts's behavior, his strange standoffishness, whether that was the result of Nutgate. And unfortunately for her, I think he used Nutgate in two ways. I think he used it to confuse her, but I also think to some extent he felt justified in doing what he did ultimately. That's not to say he was justified, just that he, based on what was done to his family, he felt that he could do the same to Shanann. And that is really unfortunate. It's unfortunate that this event happened when it did, because Chris Watts, I think, was looking for a reason to deal with his family. And I think Nutgate provided not the full reason, but certainly part of what I think Chris Watts needed in his reptilian brain to do what he did. Now, that's not speculation. I'm going to be showing you through the discovery how Chris Watts's mind worked and what he was doing. I just want to be absolutely clear that when we study the criminal mind and we say this was what the criminal was thinking, we are not, as non-criminals, going, that's what the criminal did, that makes sense, he was right. We're saying that's fucked up, this was his fucked up way of thinking, this is the mindfuckery involved, and that kind of explains it within that situation. In other words, we're understanding why it happened. We're not rationalizing or justifying or giving an excuse to the person. Does that make sense? I've heard a lot of people say, if this person did that or that person did that, they didn't deserve to die. Of course they didn't. Nobody deserves to get murdered. So, when a crime is committed, the person responsible is the criminal. End of story. But true crime's about understanding the dynamics involved, understanding how things happen, joining the dots, and finding out kind of also how the world works. Not the world of that we get told in terms of the mainstream media, not the world how we are explained in terms of the criminal. It's the world that we're not told about. It's the world that is hidden from us. And so that is really what you want to do. And what I want to appeal to you is, it's 2 years later. Let's try to deal with this subject in a new way, with a new psychology from our side. And step one in that process is, let's try to not be emotional about this emotive subject. So we're going to be dealing with Nutgate. We're going to be dealing with the events of July 9th. And what I want to ask you to do is try to, just once, try to sort of leave your emotions at the door. You can, all I'm saying is try to do it. You can then maybe listen to this video again and be as emotional as you like. But just try to not be emotional, and let's see where that gets us, right? Obviously, the key to understanding what happened on July 9th and the after effects of that has everything to do with the emotions of the day. But it doesn't help if we get emotional. It also doesn't help if we take sides. So what I want you to try and do is divorce yourself from being Team Shanann, Team Watts, Team Armchair, whatever you are, and just try and think about it in a completely independent way and say, let's just try and understand what happened here without being on anyone's team, just figuring out objective reality. So almost like being a divine presence there, just observing. Does that make sense? And I want you to raise your standard in that area. I want you to suspend your disbelief, suspend your doubt, suspend your gripes or whatever, and just let's see what the information that I'm going to quote in the discovery, the facts that we know, where does that take us? And you're going to see it's actually quite shocking. And that's why it's important not to be emotional. Let's allow the information to speak for itself. Worth playing for. I can also refer you to the chronological timeline for if you want to read about this yourself. That is online on crimerocket2.com, and you can go and check it out there on your own time if you're interested. If you're new to this channel or if you're enjoying the current content, please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So I think the first point to make is to contextualize Nutgate. And that is kind of the point of this whole recapping of the timeline, is you don't want to just see one day or one event, you know, day by day and sort of say, okay, that little piece there and that little piece there. You want to see all of these episodes lining up. You want to not only see the chronological order, the way that they play out, the one day built on the other day, but you also want to see how it fits into what went on before and what went on after. Now, what I think is very sad and kind of disconcerting about Nutgate is exactly when it happens. Nutgate happens 5 days after July 4th, and July 4th, Watts and Shanann had such a big argument that it actually caused an argument with Kissinger. And then they had another argument about Watts going to watch a movie where he wasn't answering Shanann's calls. So Shanann was kind of getting justifiably worried, nervous. You know, I think her sixth sense was sort of ticking, flickering or whatever. And then within that context, when she's with his mother-in-law at his home, at the home where he grew up, when something happens there's an explosion. But Shanann had kind of been primed by Watts's infidelity anyway. Does that make sense? So in that sense, we can really feel for Shanann, and we can really see why she would justifiably have been not in a very nice place when she went to his mother-in-law, right? At the same time, and I know some of you don't like to do this, but at the same time we can look at the criminal psychology that is operating here, where Chris Watts is just getting onto the whole thing of, well, what happens when Shanann loses her temper? I'm talking about with July 4th, compared to when Kissinger loses her temper, right? And then also we're going to see Nutgate, what impact that has on Chris Watts in terms of the question, why didn't he just get a divorce? And then also there's the thing of, you know, the garage sensor was something that was in play at this time. Shanann was sort of worried about the garage sensor, and then what happened? Her concentration, her focus changed to Nutgate. And the question is, did she ever follow up? After this, did she remember that the garage sensor was an issue? Or did this kind of almost like gaslight her? Did it almost throw her off track, and in a way that obviously suited her husband, right? just something to bear in mind. But as I say, you can only think this way when you being as objective as possible and you're not being emotional. The other thing that is a very disturbing thought, but it is something we have to deal with when we study criminal psychology and a case like this where you've got so much information. When there's a premeditated murder, it's important to ask the question, when did it start? When did those impulses start? When did those murderous thoughts originate? When did they germinate? What was the seed for that? And as we go through Nutgate, I want you to consider the possible importance of Nutgate, which is, I mean, a nut is a seed in itself, isn't it? But just consider the possibility of Nutgate being an important part of either starting the premeditation, in other words, sowing the very first seed, or getting that conveyor, if some of those seeds were sort of already in play, getting the conveyors that are now going to plant them in process or in gear, whatever the word is. So in other words, to what extent did Nutgate accelerate that process or start that process? And again, you're only going to be able to think about this. We're juggling a couple of balls in our minds, a couple of concepts. You're only going to keep track of this if you can try and not get too emotional while we're dealing with this. Does that make sense? One of the ways to not get emotional is to not take a position on Shanann's decision or reaction or the attack on Cindy. In other words, I don't want you to think, is she right or is she wrong, or is Cindy right or wrong? I just want you to observe. So I don't want you to have it resonate with something you did or would do or anything like that. I want you to simply, this is Shanann in her story, and without making any judgments, we just want to see how Shanann in her story, in the context, what things play out as a result of it. Okay. So we're going to start this sort of difficult territory, something of a minefield, by going through the sort of vanilla of the phone data review. Now, the phone data review is essentially what this review, the 2 years ago today, Chris Watts, is all about. And as I say, after 2 years, hopefully we've got the perspective now where we can be somewhat, not disconnected, but a little bit less close to the case and the characters, that we can be less emotional about it. And if you look at the events from July 9th, there's very little that sort of gives away the color, the texture, the tone of Nutgate, right? So if you were going through the phone data review, which by the way is on Discovery page 2084 and I think 2085, you might just pass it by and not really, it might not even really register with you. I'll tell you one of the reasons why it might not register is somebody else's issues aren't really a big deal to you. I'm talking about all their issues, the issues with a mother-in-law, the issues with certain things like allergies, the issues with this and that. But your issues mean a heck of a lot to you. They are your life. It's the absolute essence of your day. So, for example, I've got a puppy. I've got to deal with how to keep him happy and to get some work done. To you, that doesn't really mean anything. To me, it's kind of part and parcel of my day, right? On the other hand, for some people, that kind of thing does resonate, and it resonates kind of in a really emotional way. You might say, put your work aside, just spend all of your time with the puppy. Somebody the other day said to me, I was talking about the difficulty And they said, well, just give him away. And this young lady, I saw her in the grocery store, and she's a very nice person, but she herself doesn't have children either. And she said, just give him away, you know. And I was quite horrified. I was quite horrified for her to say that. But it does kind of bring home to you that if you're going to complain or gripe about a situation, well, what's the alternative? You know, do you want to give this person you love, or this animal that you love, away? And the answer is, well, I don't. But I think the answer for Chris Watts in that situation was that he did want to. And I think at this stage he was thinking more of the unborn child. I think he was thinking, I don't want this unborn child until July 9th. And then I think he thought of the broader thing of the lives of his other children and his wife, and the life that he wanted. Does that make sense? I mean, I hadn't thought... Anyway, let me just get to the point here. Okay, so when you go to the discovery, on July 9th at 05:18, Shanann called Watts and held a 10-minute conversation. So obviously at this point, Nutgate hadn't happened, right? So again, it's a very early call. It's okay, I guess, because Watts is working. July 9th, 2018, of course, was a Monday, so Watts would have sort of been getting ready to go to work. And so Shanann called him before he went to work and spoke to him for about 10 minutes. And possibly this conversation was still complaining about the Vivian sentence, saying, you better sort this out this week, today. You better go and get this done now. You know, it's gone on for long enough, kind of thing. And at the end of the day, and this is 11 minutes past 4, Shanann called Watts and held a 14-minute conversation, right? Now, I don't think that conversation was about Vivian. I think that conversation was about Nutgate. 14 minutes is quite a long conversation. And then about an hour and 15 minutes after that, at 17:24, Watts made an unanswered call to Shanann. Maybe he didn't want her to answer, but she called back immediately, and they had a almost 9-minute conversation. So if you add it all together, 10 minutes plus 14 is 24, plus 9 is 33. On July 9th, they've had the longest conversation thus far in a single day. At 2016, and I guess this is via text, otherwise how would the phone data reviewer know it? But he says, Shanann discussed how Watts' mother gave Celeste ice cream with nuts in the ingredients. Shanann felt this was done in defiance of her warnings of Celeste's food allergies. Shanann told Watts, you should call your dad and tell him you did not appreciate your mom putting your daughter at risk today, nor do you like that she teased our girls. You should also say you don't appreciate her saying they have to learn they can't always get what they want, referring to the ice cream. They are 2 and 4. Watts replied, I will call him and tell him what I think about this. It's not fucking cool at all, because it is the kids. I will set this right. So what's quite interesting here is Watts is completely kowtowing to Shanann. If he's got any reservations about it, bear in mind he's having an affair. And probably how he really feels about it is he doesn't really care. He doesn't really care what's worrying Shanann, and I don't think he really cares what's happened to his children. And he will almost do exactly what Shanann says just to get her off his back, so that there's not going to be a back and forth. So it's basically, yes, I called them, it's all sorted out, and then he can kind of go back to what he was doing. Does that make sense? So Watts is needing to be as unemotional as he can be, just saying exactly what he thinks Shanann wants to hear to soothe her, to calm her down. And of course, it's not quite good enough for Shanann, which is why she goes to Facebook to vent. She can't really talk to Watts, because he's not going to say, he's not going to respond emotionally. He's not there emotionally for her anyway. And he's not really being authentic in this. He's just doing as he's told and kind of going along with it. Does that make sense? But in that doing as he's told, I think a feeling that sort of emerges out of that is that he doesn't really care. I don't know whether he makes up his mind that something could have happened to Shanann legitimately, or that something, it was unlikely, or that he doesn't really care either way. He doesn't really know, and he doesn't really care. He's got other things that he's worrying about. The thing that I want to highlight here, which I think some people will really not like, but again, it's if you can hold your emotions to the side for a moment. If you think about the bottom line of what happened this day, which was the thing that really upset Shanann wasn't so much the ice cream and the nuts, and I'm going to explain that to you in a second. There are two reasons that really demonstrate why I don't think Shanann was really that bothered by that. The thing that bothered Shanann was something Cindy said. And what Cindy said was, they have to learn they can't always get what they want, right? Cindy said to Shanann something like, the children have to learn they can't always get what they want. And Shanann bristled at that. Shanann found that unbearable. Shanann was furious to have somebody tell her that. Now, I just want you to think about that as a concept. Somebody tells you you can't always get what you want. Someone tells you that your children can't always get what you want, right? Now think about the whole Watts situation as a whole. This thing of having a house you can't afford. The whole thing of Thrive, which is have a luxury car you can't afford. Go on trips that you actually can't afford to go on. Have this lifestyle that you actually can't afford while you're kind of going bankrupt. Going to a school that you can't afford. All these kind of things. And what are you kind of saying to yourself? What are you saying to everyone else as part of your MLM? You're saying you can have whatever you want. You don't need to pay for it. You don't need to earn it, really. You can just buy these powders and just get with the program, and the fairy tale's yours. You know, you just do this, and suddenly you get the whole fairy tale. You can get whatever you want. And now someone comes along and breaks through that and says, no, you can't get what you want. There's some things you can't get what you want. Now, there's a lot more to say about that, but let's sort of just jump to the conclusion, the epilogue, from this moment right here. You can't get what you want on July 9th. And what ultimately happens in this story, Shanann is murdered. Do you think that she wanted to stay alive? I'm pretty sure she did. Do you think that she wanted to make her marriage work with Watts? Do you think that she wanted to see her children grow up? Do you think she wanted to give birth to Nico and have him raised in a happy home? I think she did. Do you think she wanted to continue to grow as a person and live out her life and enjoy, you know, the little life on the prairie in Colorado? I think she did. But she didn't get what she wanted. She lost everything. 5 weeks from here, she lost everything. Forever. And so did Cece. Cece wanted to grow up, I'm sure. Cece, I'm sure, wanted to breathe when she couldn't breathe. Cece didn't want to end up in an oil well. Cece didn't want to lose her sister and lose her mother. Cece wanted to go to school and grow up and get married and live her life. She didn't get what she wanted. It happens. You don't get what you want. It does happen. Sometimes in cruel ways, like in true crime, and sometimes in ordinary, obvious ways, like, a puppy wanting to go for a walk and there's not time. It doesn't happen. You don't always get what you want in this life. The whole thing with coronavirus right now is a test of that. I want this, I want that, I want to do this now, I want to do that now. Well, should you? And then you say, you know what, I don't actually believe coronavirus. I think it's a myth. I don't think it's not going to affect me. It's affecting the entire world, but I don't think it's going to affect me. It's affecting the world economy. No, I don't think it's going to affect me. I want this, and well, you can't. The shop's closed. So this is quite a shock, I think, especially to the millennials and the generation being born now, of what can happen to a world that seems inviolable. Is that it is quite vulnerable, that all its systems can creak and crack and even break because of something like this. And so what Cindy's saying, Cindy may not have been very nice about it. I don't know, I wasn't there. Cindy may have been quite mean about it. Cindy may have been unfair about it. Cindy may have been wrong about it. Cindy may have been unjustified or whatever. But in another way, what she's saying is valid. You can't always get what you want. And think about this just in a completely different way. Think about it in the sense of it as almost an early warning to Shanann. I'm talking about if this statement had come from any other person, if it had come from Nicole Atkinson, for example, or Cassie, or Addie, or Josh, or any other person, or her own mother, you can't always get what you want. And then think about what happened after that. I want to get a divorce. This is from Chris Watts. I want to get a divorce. I'm having an affair. Now, well, I don't want that. I need to stay married. We need to pay off our debt. We need to make this work. I can't raise 3 children alone in Colorado. You can't always get what you want. That's all I want you to think about is that as a kind of an early warning system. Imagine if Shanann kind of responded in a totally different way, where she said, that's actually right. And you know what, I want this marriage to work with Chris, but it's not working out. Something's going on. I want this baby, but I don't think he does. You can't always get what you want. But Watts replied, I'll call him and tell him what I think about this. I'll call him. I'll call my father. And it's quite interesting that he's not apparently speaking to his mother. He says it's not fucking cool. It's one of the few times Watts swears. But it's almost as if to assure Shanann that he's on board. He's totally on board with the amount of, I'm not going to take any shit, right? And then he says, I'll set this right. And that's the same thing he said to Shanann when he was with her in North Carolina. Is he said, I will fix this, meaning the problem between them. And we know what he did. So we're at about half an hour into this episode. I don't want to make it like a marathon, but I'm going to refer to the blog post where I said we don't want to project or transfer who we are onto them. Whether we think peanuts or tree nuts were the real problem, or whether Nutgate was justified or irrelevant, isn't the point. It's what they thought, how they reacted, how the dynamics played out in terms of their personalities. And then I mentioned the vanilla version of the phone data review, and from there you can then scroll down on the blog post to the end, and all that mess on social media is the messy business of family dynamics and human psychology. It doesn't fit into the neat black and white confines of a few lines in the phone data review, yet it's absolutely integral to understanding criminal motives and the underlying mechanisms of what drove a man to annihilate his family. So I'm not saying it is incidental, I'm not saying it is insignificant, I'm saying it is integral. That Nutgate played a major role in the events that followed. For an amateur investigator glossing through the timeline, this incident, as I said earlier, would be easy to miss. The only telltale clue that shit had really hit the fan from the official phone data review is Watts putting himself on record by saying it's not fucking cool at all. And there's a photo of Shanann, a selfie taken in Spring Lake at the Watts home, and they're swimming in a pool, or Cindy is, and it's a kind of a similar photo to the one I showed you yesterday of Ronnie, where Shanann is photographing her in-laws, but they're not really in it. They're not smiling. It's almost, one almost gets the sense that she's taking photos of them without their permission, and it's to promote Thrive. I don't see Cindy wearing a patch, whereas Ronnie was. And so one gets the idea that Shanann got along with Ronnie better than she got along with Cindy. It takes a real sleuth to know his way around social media to dig up the true meat and potatoes of what went down that day. It's because it's not on Shanann's social media, it's not on her Facebook page. Shanann vented on the afternoon of July 9th, perhaps not just about nuts, that was just the trigger. She had a lot on her plate: the pregnancy, her lupus, her husband becoming cold and distant, and the widening more of a money malaise that just wouldn't go away. So when Shanann tore into Watts' mother, she was really crying tears of anger at the world. If you look at this first post of Shanann, you can actually see the profile picture that's on there. And that's a picture taken, I think, in Aberdeen at her parents' home. And it's the well-known picture where she's sort of wearing a black blouse and she's showing off a Thrive patch. And that is the image that I'm saying has subsequently been removed. It's been changed by someone other than Shanann Watts. After Shanann died, they put up a stronger image promoting Thrive, where Shanann is a much smaller figure and Thrive is a much bigger presence in the image, if that makes sense. Now bear in mind, Shanann's profile is almost mostly about Thrive, not about herself. It's about trying to sell something. And so after her death, we see that kind of perpetuated. On July 9th, she writes on Facebook, "I need to vent to people who understand." But just look at those first 4 words. I need to vent. And she does. She's been going through a torrid time with Watts. That's not what she's venting about, but that is actually what is eating at her. Her husband is not really supportive. He's pretending to be supportive. He's being his two-faced self. But he's not really there for her. He's becoming distant. He's becoming his monstrous self. And so she talks about, my 2.5 is severely anaphylactic to most all tree nuts. I think she meant to say to most tree nuts, then she wrote all tree nuts. And we are visiting in-laws. I specifically said we can't have them in the house when we stay. I think Shanann is used to saying things and everybody sort of jumping or everybody listening. I think Shanann's used to giving orders and having them sort of obeyed. I think Shanann's used to almost the way you would talk to a child, talking to other people, expect them to listen. She says that her mother-in-law said that we don't buy them, we're not going to buy nuts. And then she said, I specifically mentioned the one she's deathly anaphylactic to as well. And so she says the word specifically twice here. She says, I specifically said that. I specifically mentioned that. But, I wasn't really listened to. And she says that in the third paragraph. She says, I arrived and on the floor shelf of her center island was a big bag of pistachios, big bad one. So she kind of is saying she gave these instructions and then she arrives there and the first thing she finds are these pistachios. Almost like Cindy has put them there on purpose to spite her. Right? And it's almost like that is Shanann's experience of going to see her in-laws. There's no swimming in the pool or... It's just about nuts. That's really all it's about. And then she talks about Nutgate. She talks about her other granddaughter. I just want to pause the narrative that Shanann's giving here to provide a little bit of further context. And this isn't me saying this. This is from the Discovery, page 686 in the Discovery. You go down a couple of bullet points and it refers to Rusick said that Shanann found pistachios in his room and became very upset because Celeste is very allergic to them. He said she wasn't supposed to be able to have kids because she had lupus and the girls were her life. So the point to emphasize is that Shanann found pistachios in a room in the house at Aberdeen, so where she was staying with her parents. Obviously she spent most of her time, most of those 5-6 weeks in North Carolina, she spent with her parents, and so there were pistachios there as well. So why wasn't there kind of a nutgate about that? And that's why I say I don't really think this is about nuts. I think it's about what Cindy said about the whole thing about she has to learn, she can't always get what she wants. Now, think about that just in a general way. Divorced from Shanann, divorced from Cindy, divorced from Nutgate. What does it mean when somebody says you can't always get what you want? It means that you kind of second. You're not a priority. You're not number one. You're not the most important person in the room. You're not the most important person, period, right? And if we see that in context, then what we also know is that Kissinger was feeling that way all the way in Colorado, all that, like across the country in Colorado. Kissinger was sort of feeling like, I don't want to just be the other person. I want to get what I want. And so if you think about it, you've kind of got these demands hitting Chris Watts at the same time. Shanann Watts wants to get what she wants in terms of she wants Chris Watts to respond to what his parents have done. And he will later, I guess, accuse her of putting a dagger between himself and his father. So it kind of was a big deal, what eventually happened. But at the same time, Kissinger's saying, oh, I don't want to be the other person. I want to be important. Right? Now, I think a really important thing to ask here is, can you imagine if Nutgate never happened? Can you imagine if, and bear in mind, Nutgate didn't just happen on July 9th. There was people blocking one another on Facebook. There was not coming to Cece's birthday party. There was the ongoing enmity kind of developing, right? Now, imagine if you take all of that away, what would there be left for Shanann and Chris Watts to focus on? Or Shanann would continue focusing on that Viven sensor, and she'd also be sort of wondering why Chris Watts is behaving badly, or behaving in a weird way, because now there's nothing that he can kind of make excuses for that. There's no nutgate for him to be sort of responding to and Shanann thinking about. Can you see what I'm saying? So that's the one thing. So imagine if you took Nutgate completely out of the narrative, how quickly Shanann could have or would have or should have been on to Chris Watts having an affair. She would have been like, why are you constantly unavailable? What is going on? It's got nothing to do with me. I've been, and in addition to that, can you imagine if Shanann just stowed the whole Thrive thing for a while? Like, I'm not going to pretend everything's fine. I'm not going to promote Thrive. And she just also put that aside and said, look, I'm with my family. I'm going to focus on my family. And the family said, how's Chris? We also want to talk to Chris. What is going on with Chris? Well, I'm a little bit concerned. He's just become quite quiet. I'm struggling to get hold of him. Don't you want to talk to him? All I'm saying is, can you imagine if you pushed those two things aside? Chris Watts would have been fully exposed mid-affair, wouldn't he? And if both sets of parents are sort of on his back at the same time, do you think he would have gone ahead with the affair? Well, not if even his parents said, look, do you know what you're doing? Should you be doing this? Shanann's pregnant. We care about our grandkids, and we care about this unborn grandchild. Maybe you shouldn't do this. But on the other hand, because Shanann had kind of declared, and we'll see this in some of the posts, because she'd sort of declared war on her mother-in-law and father-in-law to an extent, it made the thing that was actually going on, the important thing, it made that sort of, it was almost like gaslighting that situation accidentally. It made that recede in the darkness. And another thing I just want to emphasize is, think about the dilemma Chris Watts is in. None of us like him, but just for a moment, just think about it from a neutral perspective. Kissinger is saying to him, I don't want to be the other person. I kind of think Chris Watts understood where she was coming from, because I don't think he wanted to be just the other person either. He didn't want to be someone just taking orders, doing chores, giving away his paycheck, just sort of being a bit part player in someone else's spiel. I don't think that's what he wanted. So I think when Kissinger said, I don't want to just be another person. I want a fairy tale. I want to be listened to. I want to be important. And I think Chris Watts felt simultaneously, I want to make you important. I want to make you feel important. And I'm happy to do that because I love you. But it was also the fact that she was acknowledging him, and he liked that as well. So him making Kissinger first was also kind of a way of making himself first. Now, one thing I totally disagree with the narcissist narrative is that Chris Watts did all of this for himself. Chris Watts was selfish. Chris Watts had this grandiose sense of self. Chris Watts was this covert narcissist. Well, if he did all of this for Kissinger, and that's what I believe he did, he was doing not what he thought Kissinger wanted, meaning Kissinger didn't want him to murder his family, but Kissinger did want him to put her first. His mistress did want him to put her first, and this was his dumb reasoning for how to do that. But in other words, he did it for her. He got rid of his family for her. And I'm not sure how narcissistic that is, doing something for someone else like that. I'm not sure if narcissism answers that question. I've said from the beginning, introversion answers that question. Someone who wants to avoid confrontation Someone doesn't know how to deal with the complex social issues and social stigma of something like a divorce. Someone who's socially incompetent, and someone who's a covert narcissist you'd think is socially quite competent. He's covert, but he's good at influencing people. He's covert, but he likes to get attention nevertheless. But a narcissist would have gone to court. A narcissist would have wanted to protect himself. A narcissist would have been interested in self-preservation. A narcissist may have taken secret pleasure in being at the center of attention in a trial. A narcissist would have felt that he wants to get his story out in trial. He wants to have a chance to defend himself. Right, so we're now at 45 minutes into this episode. I'm not sure if I should go through all of this. Shanann says, unfortunately, we've done this on multiple occasions. She understands the severity as her daughter is a respiratory therapist. So Jamie is a respiratory therapist. She knows what's going on. She's basically a nurse, Jamie. Right? So I do think Cindy does understand what's going on. So why is she doing it? Now, you could say she's doing it on purpose to spite Shanann. I'm not sure if I believe that. I don't think she's that sensitive, and I don't think she's going to jump whenever Shanann says jump, but I also don't think she's trying to intentionally create a situation that day. By the same way, I don't think the pistachios in the Rusek home was done on purpose. I don't think so. Even in this second post, Shanann says she told her son when he called that this should be a learning experience for my baby to learn she can't always get what she wants. So once again, she's reinforcing this thing of, you know, you can't get what you want. Now, I don't know if you're aware that there's a video Shanann shot of a vision board with Bella, where Bella's only 4 years old. She may even have been younger at the time, like 3 going on 4. And she's kind of doing a vision board with Bella saying, you know, what do you want? You can have it. You know, if you just think it, you can have it. Do you want to go to Disneyland? Do you want a Lamborghini? And Bella's like, well, I want to write. I want to draw. I want to play with mommy and daddy. She's not thinking of like material possessions, even though Shanann's trying to sort of get that response from Bella as a tutorial to all her thrivers. And the message behind that is magical thinking. If you say you can have something, you can have it. Why can't you have it? Why can't you have whatever you want? Say what you want right now, and then you're gonna get it. Just say it. Speak it into the ether, and then you can have it. Okay, well, you know, if it's Shanann, then can't you just say, well, I want a big house. Well, you've already got one, but are you going to be able to keep it? I want an expensive car. Okay, you've got one. Are you going to be able to keep it? So Shanann's response is ultimately she bit her tongue in the house, and then she says it's the last time my kids stepped foot in her house. And unfortunately that was true. It was the last time the children were ever in that house. When Chris Watts returned to the house on the 6th of August, the last time he stepped foot in the house, he wasn't allowed to take the kids with. And so that was also kind of confirmation that you're never going to see the kids again. And so Watts in his dumb reptilian brain probably thought, if the kids disappear, no one's going to wonder where they were, because Shanann's already said, I'm taking the kids and you'll never see them again, in terms of his parents. So that's sorted out. I'm talking about in terms of a premeditated murder. How am I going to explain the fact that the kids disappeared? Well, here it is. Here's your explanation. You're never going to see the kids again. You're also blocked on Facebook, so you're not going to know where I am. Problem solved. And, you know, people who say, I don't know how Chris Watts thought he was going to get away with it. In his mind, he probably thought, the people I need to fool here are basically my parents and Kissinger, and that's basically it. If I can fool them, then they are the people I care about, and that's it. And I'll be able to fool them. And I'm not sure whether he didn't initially. Shanann goes on to say, I'll fight everyone that puts them in harm's way. I mean, that is Shanann being a tiger for children. One can't blame her for that. One can, in fact, be very, be very happy that Shanann loves her children this much. And in a weird way, all of this defense of her children, if this ever went to trial, and Chris Watts did make the case that Shanann killed the children, wasn't him, then this stream of sort of ranting would show to what an extent Shanann wanted to protect the lives of her children, 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks before they died. So this would vindicate her. This show of defiance and anger at slightly endangering, well, not slightly, but endangering the lives of her children, what kind of reaction it gave you. So that would prove that she did love her children, that she did care about them. Then someone in this thread kind of suggested that I think you need to have your husband talk with her, with Cindy, lay down the law, and then Shanann responded, "He will!" exclamation mark. Then she continues saying she refuses to read labels. I gave a list of pre-approved foods since she insisted on getting before we arrived, and name brand of items that were safe and she liked. And then she writes she got none of them. She gave them a list and she got none of them. Then Shanann goes on to say, trust me, my favorite nuts are tree nuts, but they are not in my house at all. Except when you go into Shanann's Facebook timeline, you find peanut butter on her kitchen counter, open with a spoon in the middle of it, right? And that's not all. There's also another image of two, I'm not quite sure what the brand is, but there's peanut butter, I think, in the freezer. And the autopsy actually doesn't refer to a tree nut allergy, but specifically a medical history significant for peanut allergies. And so here you have peanut butter in the Watts home. So what is going on here? One can take it further than this. I don't really want to, but you can also say, well, wow, you have all these dangerous ingredients in ice cream, right? And then you can, by the same token, say, well, aren't there a lot of ingredients in Thrive products which are also a sort of a potpourri of sort of different things, right? And if we just take one bar called I think it's the Pro Lemon Meringue bar, and you're going to look at the ingredients. It's things like tapioca fiber, palm kernel oil, whey protein concentrate, palm fruit oil, sunflower seed butter, non-fat dry milk, sunflower lecithin, and so on, yogurt cultures. So, if you are absolutely terrified that there's going to be something that is going to kill your child, and you want to keep ice cream out of your child's hands, then maybe something like these bars wouldn't be a good idea either. And yet you see them not only in the house, but sometimes they seem to be fed to the children as well. Shanann goes on to talk about her heart is still racing 30 minutes later. So she obviously went onto Facebook around about half an hour after this happened. She's saying this in the present tense, my heart is still racing 30 minutes later. So that's where she's sort of gone to deal with this. She's saying she's experiencing tears of anger. And for the third time, she actually says her response to my husband was, "This is a learning experience to my 2-year-old to realize she can't always get what she wants. F you." And now we move beyond Nutgate to what was said at the in the second confession in February 2019, when the agents went to see what's at Dodge Correctional, and he was sort of asked, what sort of happened, what was kind of going on there. On page 12 of the CBI report, he says, or he's quoted saying, that he felt like taking Celeste and Bella's lives was caused by an anger with Shanann that he took out on everyone in front of him that morning. He had never been angry before, and this was like the epitome of being angry. He had rage and lost his mind. He was angry with Shanann over separating him from his family. When he and Shanann, so what he's actually talking about here by separating him from his family, he's sort of talking about Nutgate. But not only Nutgate, it went on before that. It went on even on their wedding day. His parents didn't attend, right? And yet on page 13, and you can see it in that pink highlighted text, the last entry, he was angry since July 2018, when Shanann told him his parents could never see their granddaughters again, right? Now bear in mind, Watts went to North Carolina in the first week of August, and for the first week of August. He didn't go and see his family himself until the very last day. So even though he was in North Carolina, he was with Shanann's family the whole time, he was with Shanann the whole time, he was with his kids the whole time, and he really didn't want to be with them. He wanted to be with Kessinger and to some extent, I guess, with his own family. But he wasn't. He was sort of with Shanann, and he wasn't very happy to be with them. And he made that kind of obvious. He's quite standoffish. And everyone noticed it, but they were sort of probably thinking, well, this is just introvert Chris. He's sort of used to being in the background. He's a bit quiet. Maybe he's a bit concerned about the unborn child. How they couldn't have been more wrong. Chris was very much out of the marriage already by then. He was trying to bring about a miscarriage. He was very much not in the happy family thing anymore. But they thought this is just Chris Watts being quiet Chris Watts. It wasn't. But he pertinently says, and this is February 2019, he says he was angry since July 2018, when Shanann told him his parents could never see their granddaughters again. So when he went to see them, on the last day he was in North Carolina, she said, "You're not taking the kids. They're not going to see them again." And I think that made him angry. But I also wouldn't read too much into what he's saying here, because I don't really believe him when he says he was so angry with Shanann. I think he saw this as a useful opportunity to do what he wanted to do anyway. In other words, he opportunistically took advantage of Shanann's temper, took advantage of this conflagration, and used it to his own benefit. And so his parents would kind of expect, oh, we're not going to see our granddaughters again. And they didn't. And they would have then blamed Shanann for that, instead of blaming their son. And even after he committed the crime, they did believe for quite a while that Shanann must have done it. And slowly they did come around. Slowly, I mean, today they do accept that their son did it, and only their son did it. If we go even further through the report, this is on page 15 of the CBI report. It refers to Celeste celebrating her birthday in North Carolina a few days after July 17th, 2018. I think that's a typo. It should be on July 17th. And his parents did not attend after Shanann made a post off Facebook about allergies. Shanann said the post wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but Shanann had a method to her madness. That's what Chris Watts was saying. Shanann was convinced his mother tried to kill their daughter by putting nuts in front of Celeste. His mother felt like Celeste's allergies was not serious. After the incident with the nut allergy and Celeste, he didn't speak to his parents until August 6th, 2018, which is what I've just told you. His parents said they weren't sure they could ever forgive Shanann. His parents asked him if he had someone else, because they saw Watts texting someone the entire time he was at their house in North Carolina. So what's really interesting here is Shanann doesn't seem to notice what's going on with Chris Watts. Maybe he's saying, I'm texting my parents or something. But his parents immediately realize something is going on with him, and they're right. And that's why I say, what do you think would have happened if Shanann didn't have Nutgate on her mind and kind of just pushed Thrive aside for a day or two? Instead of pretending to be thriving, just deal with your real life for a while. How quickly would Chris Watts have been exposed? Shanann told him Watts wasn't allowed to call or talk to his parents. I don't know if that's true, but it's interesting. His dad was his hero, and he felt like he lost him because he wasn't able to talk to him for 3 weeks. Interestingly, when Ronnie contacted Watts on Sunday, the Sunday of the murders, August 12th, Ronnie wanted to know if he could FaceTime with the girls, and Watts said no. Now, there was no reason he couldn't. But Watts's answer was that, if he does FaceTime, Bella might tell her mother and he'd get into trouble. But I think that he had an ulterior motive with it. I think he wanted his parents to get used to the idea of not seeing the children. Doesn't that make sense? Okay, so we've gone past the hour mark. I have looked online for if there are any Thrive products that contain peanut butter. I did find Thrive recipes for shakes that contain, where you add peanut butter to make a shake. But I haven't really found, I don't know whether there are Thrive products that contain peanut butter. I'm going to say the same thing that I said on the blog post, which was 1 year after the incident. So 2 years later, I'm going to ask the question, do you think Shanann did overreact? And if she did that have an impact on what happened to her? I'm not saying did she deserve what happened to her, just that do you think that may have had an impact on her? And the answer to this question isn't what you or I think, it's what her husband thought. It's how this played into his criminal shenanigans, and what we can say for certain is that it absolutely did play into it. It played into not only the motive, but the mechanism. How Watts thought he could get away with the crime is because his parents thought Shanann, didn't want them to see the kids, and so she'd taken them away. And so if barely a month later they disappeared forever, wouldn't they have thought, well, that's what happened? And I think that was quite a tempting scenario which Watts weaponized, given what he wanted to achieve in his personal little spiel with Kissinger. Doesn't that make sense? On page 12 of the CBI report, it turns out that Ronnie took the entire week off when they were in North Carolina, but Shanann booked them for a 5-day stay at the beach instead. So even though they still wanted to see their grandchildren, they never got to see them. And Watts probably felt, if they die, that's simply continuing the status that was present already, which is that Shanann couldn't see what Shanann was doing on Facebook, including the children. Watts had deleted his Facebook profile, and they were already not seeing their grandchildren, so they wouldn't blame Chris Watts, they'd blame her. And so when the FBI cottoned onto the idea of, did Shanann do something, blaming her, it wasn't such a long walk in the park for Chris Watts to take it even further than that. And all of this also gives a little bit of credence to the whole sending of the doll with the mat around it. Doesn't that make sense? We also need to see that in context. Another way to look at this, and this is really my penultimate point that I want to make, is, was this a serious thing that happened? And the answer is, another way of looking at it is, Bella was so affected by this that 5 weeks later, the day or basically around about 24 to 48 hours before her murder, Bella was worried that she wasn't going to see her sister ever again. She said this to the babysitter. She said to the babysitter, my mommy told me that if I go to sleep, when I wake up, I may never see Cece again. And so she was afraid to go to sleep. This is what she said to the babysitter. And this was because of Nutgate. So even this was instilled in Bella's heart and mind. So Nutgate was a very, very real incident that happened that rippled through the Watts family and rippled through the next 5 weeks. To conclude, I want to talk about quite a sophisticated concept that basically addresses all of this, which is what I call social death. Now, people don't really appreciate the impact of social death when it doesn't apply to them. And the police and certainly lawyers don't seem to understand what it means and how it can have an impact on an actual crime, because it's kind of a symbolic thing. But social death is absolutely real, and it often is the reason why crimes are committed in the first place. And so Chris Watts, to an extent, felt that he was suffering, I guess, a social death of sorts in his marriage. I think he was terrified that after, if he did get divorced, if he did go through it the right way, that he would suffer an even greater social death in the aftermath, that he would lose everything, that he would probably also lose his reputation. Because think about it like this. If this happened over nuts, what would happen over an affair while Shanann was pregnant? Just imagine how Shanann would react then, and the venting going on about that. It was a risk that he felt he wasn't willing to take, right? The social death of his family also preceded the actual murders. And so that's why I've often said the social death was an important factor preceding the actual death, and in a way actually making it, facilitating it, if that makes sense. You could also say the opposite was happening as well, where Kessinger was doing the opposite of creating a social death for him. She was bringing part of his social persona to life. She was bringing the unacknowledged Chris Watts to life, where she was acknowledging him. She was saying, put me first. I want to be important in my life, in your life. You're important in my life. And he liked being the sole focus of her, and she liked being the sole focus of him. Of course, she didn't know about the pregnancy, or did she? That's another aspect we need to address as we go on through the timeline. I just wonder, if you seriously think that Kessinger knew about the pregnancy, do you think she would be so adamant that she wants to be first? Wouldn't she have been sort of registering on some level that obviously I can't be first if your wife's pregnant? So the social death aspect is something that's affecting all three of them at the same time. It's affecting Shanann, who feels like she's being invalidated by her mother-in-law. It's affecting Chris Watts, who feels like he's losing contact with his parents, and he wants to keep his affair going. That's his idea of coming alive. And then Kessinger as well. She also doesn't want to suffer the social death of telling people about the affair and everything that happens. And of everyone in this story, I think Kessinger has suffered the greatest social death of all. I mean, she's totally disappeared, hasn't she, from from the whole narrative. And that is why I say social death is a lot like actual death, if you that person. Thanks for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.